I guess I guess I was inspired by our chat recently about Joseph Mengele,
Hmm.
um, and how it's comforting, I suppose, to think that fuckers who experiment on humans are, from another place, another time,
Sure. Yeah.
another part of the world, another era, outliers, freaks, you know,
Yeah.
impossible for us to relate to. But it just, I wonder a lot about stuff that we take for granted today in
Mm.
terms of, in terms of medicine and psychology. How much of that stuff is built on the foundations that were put there by those
Mm.
unfettered by ethics,
Hmm.
How many of the fucking commonplace practices, therapies, procedures, treatments were kind of, the foundations were laid by just people who experiment in ways that would now rightly appear fucking wildly unethical
Right.
to us in 2022,
Hmm.
um I think the answer is more than you might fucking be comfortable with.
It always is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, there's so many examples of unethical human experimentation from all around the world. I mean, I think you might have mentioned to me the program of intentionally infecting people with syphilis.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Or not
Um,
treating people who had it. Yeah.
yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. In South Africa in the late 20th century, there was a huge program of forcibly trying to convert, uh, trying to kind of forcibly, air quotes, cure homosexuality
Oh
by
gosh.
experimenting on people in the military.
Oh no.
Just honestly, history and recent history is littered with examples of, you know, preempting codes of ethics by just wantonly experimenting on fucking human beings without their knowledge, without their consent,
Mm.
uh, in a way that is ruinous to people's lives, people who still live now.
Yeah.
Um, from a psychological standpoint, right, a fascinating case I'm going to talk to you about right now, in the 1920s.
Okay.
Have you heard of cognitive behavioral therapy?
Boy, have I. Yes.
There you go. Of course you have. Of course you have.
It's the thing that we keep saying my mom needs.
There we are. Yes, CBT,
Yes. Good old
and
CBT.
behaviorism, as a discipline, I guess, as a psychiatric discipline. Behaviorism. It takes as one of its foundations that we are all born human beings as completely blank slates, and every kind of behavior that we develop is uh, is developed from interacting with and learning from our surroundings, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Behaviorism. So I want to talk to you about John Watson. Okay,
All right.
ring any bells?
I mean, John Watson is a very common name.
All right. Well, this particular John Watson, a psychiatrist, a pioneer in the field of behaviorism,
Okay.
born in the 1870s, and this idea that all human behavior is acquired through conditioning, interacting with the environment. This was one of his big. He looked at the work done by people like Pavlov.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thought, what about with people?
Of course.
Right.
Yeah. Why not?
So to quote one of John Watson's, let me just quote, he says that psychology, as the behaviorist views it, is a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. Its goal is the prediction and control of behavior. Introspection forms no part of its methods, nor is the value of its data dependent on the readiness with which they lend themselves to interpretation in terms of consciousness. Forget the inner process. Everything that we do, think, feel, every way that we act is learned from interacting with our surroundings, right?
It's like a real extreme nurture argument.
100%, 100%. Hardline nurturist,
yeah.
You might say. So to 1920, right?
Okay.
he's working at Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore, and like I said, he took Pavlov's work on conditioning and wanted to build on it. Hence what came to be known as the Little Albert experiment.
Okay. Not familiar to me.
Good. Well, Little Albert. So Watson, alongside one of his students, a lady by the name of Rosalie Rayner, who he later had an affair with and went on to marry, they wanted to determine whether it was possible to condition a phobia.
Oh no!
In an otherwise emotionally stable child.
Come on.
Yeah, this fucking scarecrow ass Jonathan Crane motherfucker wanted to see if it was possible to give an otherwise perfectly normal, emotionally stable child the fear.
Yeah, I feel like it's very possible.
Oh, 100%.
Doesn't need to be. It's
100%.
one of those things you don't need to do to a kid, but go on.
First things first, let's see. What do we need? A baby. They paid a nurse at the campus hospital a single dollar. Yeah, the princely sum of one fucking American dollar. And Hopkins and Rayner began a series of experiments on this nurse's son at the age of 9 months old.
Oh gosh.
To attempt to condition it into a state of phobia.
And did they tell her that was what they were trying to do?
Unknown
Okay.
at this time. But the lady in question was a wet nurse at the campus hospital, and there are opinions that she might have been coerced, that she might have felt unable to refuse, right. But for whatever reason, she had that shiny dollar bill and handed her child, who became known as Little Albert.
Okay. I'm sorry, I got hung up on the shiny dollar bill thing. Like, why would a dollar bill be shiny?
They buffed it.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, obviously.
To make it appear more attractive.
Right. And that's how they coerced her.
That's hearsay, but...
Okay, what happened to Little Albert?
Let's define what a phobia is first, right? A phobia, it's an exaggerated or unrealistic sense of fear or danger about a situation or object, okay?
Okay.
So Little Albert, at 9 months old, they started to prime Little Albert for the experiment. What they did was they sat Little Albert in a room, sat him in front of a mattress, and showed him a bunch of things, right? A bunch of similar items. A rabbit, an actual rabbit, a white rat, a dog, a monkey.
A monkey? An actual monkey?
Oh, yeah, an actual monkey.
The 20s were wild, man.
A dog, a mask, so various masks, like a Father Christmas mask, a Santa Claus mask, little bits of cotton wool, all stuff with similar white, fluffy kind of appearance. Yes. Mm-hmm. And to establish a baseline, Little Albert showed absolutely no fear response to any of these things. He's 9 months old. These are soft, white, fluffy objects. Why on earth would he be scared of this stuff?
It's pretty neutral.
Absolutely. So this carried on for a few months, but then the experiment began properly when Albert was around 11 months old, when he was sat in a mattress in the middle of the room, and the white rat was brought out. Albert was allowed to interact with the rat, play with the rat. And meanwhile, behind them, a fucking horrific, loud, horrible noise was generated by smacking a metal bar with a hammer repeatedly every time this poor little fucking kid touched the rat.
Oh.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Obviously, he would cry, have a shit fit. Obviously, he would react with extreme kind of fear and angst at this sound. And this carried on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Show him the rat, make the fucking horrible sound.
Right.
Until obviously.
I was just isn't that like the operant conditioning or whatever? Is that what they call that?
That is exactly what it is. It is conditioning. It is behavioral conditioning. Until, of course, Albert started to become visibly upset, even on seeing the rat. Just looking at the rat, he would start to cry. He would try to crawl away, obviously associating this rat with fear that comes from that fucking horrible loud noise.
Yeah.
But here's the fucking thing, right? This is when you realize that they'd conditioned him not just to fear that one rat, but the phobia, then that fear, he exhibited that fear response when looking at all of the other items which had things in common with the rat. You show him the white cotton wool, starts to scream. You show him a lovely rabbit, the Father Christmas mask, the Santa mask, the white furry beard, all of this stuff that had physical characteristics in common with the rat, then immediately started to generate the fear response.
Wow.
Yep.
That's wild.
They took a perfectly fucking, blank slate, normal, healthy kid and gave him a fucking phobia of white fluffy things over a period of weeks and months.
Good grief. Did they then reverse the phobia? Because that's the thing that that's what I want to know is, can you train it out? Which I know you can, aversion therapy and all that kind of stuff. Of course.
I mean, the fear response did fade over time, right?
Okay, yeah.
But as soon as the experiment ended, Albert's mother left the hospital, taking him with her. So there was no real work done at all to decondition that child after the experiments were concluded.
He just had to deal with it until
he just had to deal with it. The experiment, in fact, concluded that conditioning like that had the potential to last into early life and to impact on that individual's mature personality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. If I'm gonna fucking scream and hit metal bars at you while I show you a rat when you're a small baby, that's gonna fuck with you. Now, look, the experiment did over time come to be quite heavily criticized, right? Not least due to the fact that Albert wasn't in good health himself at the time of the experiment. He suffered from a condition called hydroencephalus, right?
Oh, the water on the brain.
Exactly that. And Albert, in fact, he died 5 years after the experiment concluded of hydroencephalus. But that means the fucking experiment is even worse, because the fact that this was a sick child anyway makes it all the more reprehensible that they spent months terrifying the poor bastard.
Tormenting him. It's just like, 2 weeks ago when you were talking about the radiation experiments, they don't try this stuff out on the people who are top of society. They try this out on the weak, the people who nobody gives a shit about, like a poor kid with a disability.
Yes, exactly. And then, Watson then went on to kind of extrapolate those results as being applicable to all healthy children. So the experiment was fucking ropey.
Right.
But here's the thing, that research was then built on by other psychiatrists and formed, the foundation of the subsequent development of behavioral therapy.
Right. Yeah.
Incredible. Just one of those things, just one of those things that we now take for granted, that was built on horrifically unethical and ropey research. I mean, since then, in the States, you've got the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, right? That was created to study issues surrounding the protection of humans in medical and psychiatric research, just like poor Albert. Little Albert wasn't his actual name, by the way. In years since, the child was actually kind of identified and named, and sadly died 5 years after the experiment. But all it does, it just makes me fucking wonder. The stuff that I buy, the therapies that I might undergo, the treatments that are now taken for granted, was this all developed just by throwing human suffering at a problem?
And we talked a while back about suffering in progress and things like that. And I think, that is always the danger, is to look at it like, well, we wouldn't have the things that we have if it weren't for the sacrificing of people in these unethical experiments and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's not true. It's just, it is how they did it, not that it was the only way they did it. Like, certainly there are ways in which you could have done research on kids who already had phobias and looking into what, they experienced in their lives that might have contributed to having that kind of phobia. Like, I know that there's certainly a lot of the things that I'm scared of and stuff like that, I didn't grow up scared of them. There's bits of trauma and things like that have led to me having certain phobias. Some I had, pretty early on, and too early for me to be able to trace it to oh, I'm afraid of it because of this. But
do you mind me asking what your phobias are? I don't think I've ever.
I've gotten better about most of them, but pretty claustrophobic.
Okay.
Which is why I almost always take stairs instead of elevators.
Yeah.
Like anything that is trapping me in any way. I have a phobia of having things cover my face, blindfolds and
the past few
masks and
years must
things
have been a
like
lot
that.
of fun
Yeah,
for you then.
it was very difficult to get used to at first because I really hate having my face covered. But hey, aversion therapy. When you have
Sure.
to do it, there you go. There's like, I really am terrified of spiders. And I have always been scared of clowns, not in like the like, oh, clowns, but like genuinely terrified of clowns. Again, I've gotten better. I've trained myself out of a lot of things. Balloons, terrified of balloons, that I've never been able to train myself out of.
Well. And again, do please tell me to fuck off if you like, but is that traceable to an incident?
I think,
because balloons is quite specific.
Right, balloons is very specific. I think it just is like a mix of various things. And something somewhere along the lines made me a very easily startled person. Right. And I think that would probably be the thing to trace back to. Where did I get this jumpiness from? It's from walking on eggshells in a volatile home.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so I think it's this like constant, like unknowing when something is going to like explode. That I think is at the root of the balloon thing.
Okay.
That would be my guess. But yeah, so it's like, if, off the top of my head, that's what I would say is like a volatile home where things were unexpectedly loud and dangerous translates into being afraid of balloons, right?
But even
I come up with that. So a person could have asked questions.
Exactly.
And gotten that out of me.
It seems as though that has led to the phobia. Interesting.
Right. There's
without having to
reasons
scare the
behind
fuck out of
things.
some, hydroencephalic infant.
Right. So it's like, yeah, this stuff was built off of this kind of research, but, I always think it's important to note that doesn't mean that, oh, thank goodness, it sucks, but at least we got this out of it. Things could have been done differently in these kinds of experiments, and we would still end up, and maybe even with better results than ones that are often discredited and things like that for their ethical problems.
Is it grounds, I wonder? Because I mean, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, can you? You can't unlearn stuff and do it differently.
Right.
So what's the solution there? There isn't, is it? It's done now. It's happened.
Right. I mean, the solution is that board that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Makes it so that we don't do these things anymore. Which is not to say, of course, I think we'll always find out that people have still done things in terrible ways.
Yes.
But,
I guess
most things aren't conducted that way.
I guess the takeaway for me is next time you benefit or enjoy a session of cognitive behavioral therapy, do please take a moment to pour one out for little Albert, who spent way too long of his young, unhealthy life scared shitless of a Santa Claus mask, thanks to the work of John Watson.